Undoubtedly, you've seen the headlines. Leviathan Wilds slaps, Leviathan Wilds spectacular, Leviathan Wilds is a gem, even the best co-op of 2024. It's those headlines that had me run feverishly to the geek market, pay some scalper prices, and get this gem into my collection. And now that it's arrived and I've played it probably a dozen times over the last 2 to 3 days, I'm here to tell you it's fine. That's right. It's perfectly fine. It's a good game. Now, in the board game content creation kind of review space, words like fine and good aren't going to get clicks. In fact, I started to think about not even making this video whatsoever, because when I put something like Leviathan Wilds is fine, it doesn't quite grab you. But I continued to push on because I just felt like maybe there's a couple people out there that have the same proclivities as me that this video might help to decide whether this is the type of game for you or not. And I know I am absolutely in the minority. This is very well rated on BGG already, and it seems like all the videos are extremely positive. Not to say that this isn't positive, it's just not glowing. But I am not going to apologize for my opinion. I've thought really hard about this. I thought I had to have been looking at this thing incorrectly, but I am what I am, and this is my opinion. And I am what I am, what I am, what I am. In this video, I'm going to get into a really teeny tiny overview, but then dive deep into the details as to why I think this game is good. Fine. It's fine. This game is built on a rock solid foundation of mechanics. You as a climber are jumping around a map, knocking off crystals in the form of dice that have a specific number, which happens to be the HP. You use action points to jump all around the map and knock the crystals off. If you do all of that, knock all of the crystals off, you win. And when I say that's it, it's not really it. It's not that easy. I mean, everything is complicated by this row of cards that are called threat cards. Those threat cards are unveiled prior to each and every player's turn, basically telegraphing what exactly is about to happen to you. This gives the player the opportunity to maybe swerve out of the way or just brace themselves for what is the inevitable. This does help to influence decisions and make it feel a little bit more strategic rather than luck-driven. These effects come in the form of losing health, adding blight. So there is a health/blight tracker that has 2 markers moving in towards each other. If they ever have to overlap or pass each other, you kick the bucket. And if you have a partner, that partner basically just has 1 turn to win the game, or you both kick the bucket. You also might lose grip. Grip is actually the deck that you're drawing cards from. We'll get to that a little bit later. Back to the Leviathans. Leviathans are these giant monsters that you're not trying to slay like its video game predecessor, Shadows of the Colossus. You're actually trying to knock these crystals off and save them. A much more positive spin on the giant monster slaying genre. There are general principles that apply to all of the Leviathans. There's climbing spots that are all over the map. Those spots are either empty, which you'll just fall right through, normal spots, I guess, which you can just climb on, no effect whatsoever. Then there's these yellow spots that help you to lose grip, which basically mills your deck, and these red spots that will do damage to you. On top of that, there's these ledges. These ledges act as a break in any sort of fall that you might have, and they also are a safe haven for you because in order to rest to get your cards back in your deck, you have to be on one of these ledges. There's also mushrooms that are growing all throughout the map that you can go and pick up, and they give you a one-time benefit. Those core principles are what drive what is a really excellent mechanical design, and I think the Leviathans are actually the highlight in this entire game. There are some that just function as I described, but then there's others that are incredibly interesting. A couple memorable ones, the Watcher. It has a card that goes on the map, and it's eye, and as you go to the eye and do damage, it can flip back and forth to open and close. That interacts with the threat cards depending on if an eye is open or not. It just really adds a lot of flavor to what was a more basic battle in the opening Sage Turtle. Another favorite, a la Little Shop of Horrors. is hunger. It's a giant man-eating plant that you have to scale around, get into its stomach, knock crystals off, but when you knock the crystals off, you get spit out into its mouth and you start to fall down to its chin and you have to get back in. On top of that, there's threat cards that will throw you into the stomach, which could be good or bad depending on if you've already defeated the crystals in there. It was a absolutely wonderful design and a great kind of playground to play on. And that's exactly what these Leviathans are. They are the playground in which you and your character and your deck of cards play on. Speaking on that deck of cards, I had mentioned that we were going to talk a little bit about grip, and grip is the number of cards that you have left in your deck before it runs out. The moment it runs out, you fall. Falling can be good, I guess, depending on if it's a strategic choice and you have a ledge right below you and maybe no negative effects will actually come to you. Because if you fall, there's technically nothing that happens to you other than you go straight down until you find a ledge. However, if you go across any of those yellow or red spots that I had mentioned, you are going to take the negative effect on your way down. You can fall in some other ways. Maybe you have a card that has a luck element and you miss a jump and you go into one of those void spaces that doesn't have a hold. You will fall. Maybe one of the threat cards will have the Leviathan push you down, and if there's nothing below you, you're going to fall. You also have the option at any time to just let go and fall. And that definitely can be a strategic move if you have some crystals below you and you need to get down quickly. These ledges and negative effects and falling are all drive what I think is the absolute highlight of your gameplay, which is the movement. The movement is absolutely excellent. It definitely leads to strategic decisions around jumping and gliding. By the way, you can glide down depending on the number of action points you spend, and you can just move and climb. Then there's also specialty cards that allow you to pull off more exotic maneuvers. It is by far, in my mind, the most strategic aspect of this game. But it's not all rainbows and puppies, at least based upon my experience. And that's where I want to kind of turn the subject to card play. Your cards are based upon the character and class that you select. It's a really interesting way to have asymmetry in every single game you play, assuming you don't pick the same combination, but it gives you a little bit of spice. Your character only comes with like a couple cards. I think it's 1 to 2 cards and a special ability, and the bulk of your deck is made up by your class. But you will have a hand of 3 cards, and you will spend one for its inherent action points, and then have the option to spend others based upon the skill that's printed on the card. Those action points allow you, like I had said, to climb, jump, glide around the map, inflict damage on those crystals, as well as heal and also rest. Rest, like I had mentioned, is how you get cards back into your deck and is an absolute critical component to balancing and the friction in the decision space as you are playing this game. So in going through this game, I couldn't necessarily find any sort of mechanical flaws whatsoever. I started off playing in the solo mode, and I'm not going to go deep into the solo mode, but I don't recommend it. I'd much rather play two-handed, separated. Solo mode has you pick a couple of characters, but only one class. It really pigeonholes you into really specific ways of playing. I didn't like that whatsoever. But I played quite a few two-handed solo, and then I also played with 2 people. Of the 2, I prefer the 2 people. I think the added decision on whether you spend a card to help somebody else out on their turn definitely helps with adding some crunch in your decision. But I'm thinking, like, why isn't the card play invigorating? Why isn't the card play really kind of making my brain kind of fire, especially early on? And I remembered the marshmallow test. Have you heard about the marshmallow test? This was a test, I believe Stanford University, 1960s, where they gave a child a marshmallow and said, if you wait, you'll get a second marshmallow. And that's kind of what card play actually felt like. If I was greedy and I needed to use those skills that presumably do the fun stuff, it's actually hurting me because I'm going to mill through that deck faster. Then I'll have to rest, waste action points to do so, or even risk falling to whatever consequence happens to be below me. Every single time I'm playing one of these skill cards, I'm thinking, am I eating the marshmallow right now? Like, if I were just to wait and there's this 5 action point card that allows you to do a ton, am I better off waiting till next turn to actually use it for its action points instead of using for its skill, which is almost always less effective than just using the action points? So each time you're using one of your cool skills, I didn't feel like I was doing cool stuff. And on top of that, with only having 3 cards, to me, it was really seeming like I didn't have a lot of different branching paths or decisions to make. A lot of times the decisions felt pretty obvious. I think with more cards in your hand, you start to get more confused. There's more AP. So there's definitely a benefit and a certain type of player base that would suffer by having more cards in hand. But the 3 cards just felt like, yeah, can I use the most action points possible? And are any of these skills absolutely necessary to use right this second? And to be totally fair, I know the card economy is balanced around you using these skills. It's not implicit as to how many skills you can use, and that is definitely a decision, but it's sort of tough to tell whether you should be using those skills or not, especially because they don't feel incredibly powerful. And that brings me to my next point in the card play. The skills just weren't exciting. Yesterday I was playing with my son and I turned to him and I said, why aren't you using those arcane tokens? He said, I haven't had to. And certainly there's higher level play and higher level Leviathans that will challenge you more and more. And this game is not easy by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, it's plenty of challenge on normal difficulty. It's just the extra stuff that it does just seems so benign relative to the action points that you could rather be using. With all of that said, I am actually painting with a pretty broad brush. It's not fair to really say in generality, it's all boring or all of the character skills are boring and the synergies don't work well together or they're not exciting. I think that's not true. And I think there are combinations. I just felt more often than not that was not the case. In fact, let's go a little bit deeper into character skills and some general overviews on some of these classes. So maybe you get an understanding, at least my position. We're going to go over the character skills first. And this is in rough order of interest. And the lowest interest was hazard for me. Block 1 at the cost of a grip. Meh. If I'm using hazard and I need to block and I really need to lose a card from my deck, yeah, I guess it works, but is that exciting to do? No, not at all. Yoink. When you rest, you get a mushroom. One-time bonus. Feels good. Is it an exciting strategic ability that has me play the game differently? No, definitely not. Now we'll get into some of the ones I actually like to use. In Hornet, you get to strike 1 at the distance of 1. This is absolutely useful because very often I felt like I was 1 action point away from being able to get to the spot to destroy the crystal. So absolutely, that's good. And that does drive some strategic placement and has you play the game slightly differently. Fix is a bruiser. You get +1 strike to your strike actions. Doesn't change things strategically per se, just makes you more powerful. Brick is pretty good. You get to exhaust this token you have, and it allows you to put a card from your discard pile on top of your deck. Kestrel, I have heard a lot of people's favorite, and I do agree. Kestrel has a 2 AP mega jump. You can jump 1 more space for 1 less AP. This is incredibly helpful. I actually played Kestrel yesterday and felt like I was sitting on the top of the map. I believe this was with Hunger, where there are a lot of crystals. So I actually didn't use it all that often, with the exception of jumping right out of the gates and getting up to the mouth of Hunger. Regardless, it's an incredibly powerful ability, and combined with another class can have you essentially be a ninja jumping around the map. Mystic gives you a token, and that token you flip to add 2 grip, so 2 cards back into your deck. There is a way to flip it back and use it a couple times, and you do give that same token to other players, so it's a nice little bonus for your entire crew. The most strategic change for me was with Savvy. You get this token, you can place it on any space. It basically covers those negative effects. Other climbers can use it to boost their climb by 1 as well and discard it. It definitely adds to another strategic point in the game where you're putting this token around, trying to anticipate where somebody needs that cover. I do enjoy the extra thinkiness of that character. But overall, that's all the characters. And the characters, like I said, don't add a ton, and it's not fully fair. There are cards that go with the characters, but they're very few. You don't see them all that often. They could be milled out of your deck if you hit one of those yellow spots or one of the threat cards does that, which happens all the time. And unless the card is printed with secure, there's nothing you can do. It just goes into your deck and you need to rest again to get it back, and then possibly maybe get it again in the future if you really need it to refresh a token, for example. But I didn't find that any of these abilities really changed the way that I played the game in a big way. Having much more impact are the character classes. These each come with 8 cards, and they are the thing that drives the change in your gameplay depending on what you pick. First and foremost is the Gambler. I hate the Gambler. I played the Gambler once and I'm never going to play the Gambler again. The Gambler, you need a coin to flip to work in your favor, right? Like each one of these cards has 2 different outcomes, and if you flip heads, it's good, tails, it's bad or less good, I would say. And the less good option is a huge loss relative to the AP that you could have been spending on that card. I actually flipped really well. I don't know if the token is weighted towards heads or not. If so, that might be good, giving you a little bit of a better chance. But the idea of having a 50-50 chance really stopped me from using a lot of those cards. If you're this personality that likes to gamble in games, you like the dice, you like any sort of RNG, this might be the person for you, but I do not recommend it. Mender mends. It's the typical healer class that nobody wants to play. I don't know. Hit me up in the comments if you really love people and you want to sit back and heal everyone all the time and spend your cards on somebody else instead of you doing cool stuff. The best card is this jump card that the Mender has that basically looks like it's in the pattern of wings. You could pull off some pretty cool strategic jumps if you happen to get that card in your hand and use it. The Roughneck is the typical Ranger class, good at absolutely everything, and in turn, probably one of the least memorable out of them. I played with the Roughneck, and I honestly had to look through each and every card to understand where the gimmick was, and there really isn't one. It's just overall pretty good mobility, pretty good strength, and pretty good support. This is actually a really good class if you're first starting out. Some of these classes are really specific, and the Roughneck will help a new player be able to do anything, or at least have the options to in their deck. Then there's the Breaker. If you want to be Hulk, it's the Breaker. 5 of the cards just deal with breaking stuff. I would say this one's mildly strategic, with 3 of the cards giving you some benefit around timing, but overall pretty straightforward. The Herald is a alternate, slightly less helpful than the Mender. A lot of the cards give you flexibility where they have the wording in any climber, which means you can benefit yourself or somebody else. The most excitement that any of these cards hold in my mind is kind of an interrupt where you can save somebody from a sticky situation. None of them feel particularly exciting to use on yourself. So once again, you need to be a selfless person that wants to do other stuff for other people, and you have to deal with the grip consequences. The next 2, you get a special tokens that you have to exhaust. They add a little bit of complexity to the play, first of which is a Gadgeteer. You get 1 token, and anytime that gadget keyword is on there, you can flip it to do something a little bit better. My big gripe here is 7 of the cards spend your token. Only 1 actually helps you to refresh said token, and that refresh card doesn't have secure, so it's pretty likely it's going to get discarded on you, and you're going to have to wait for it to come back around. At least that's what happened in my place. One of the best and my most favorite classes to play is Magus, and I actually wish all of them were this complex. At least, like, this is, I believe, the most complex class in the entire game. I wish it was the benchmark for complexity and we went up from here. Basically, the Gadgeteer with 3 tokens, you are spending a certain number of them, and there's typically a couple of different strengths of action depending on how many of those arcane tokens that you flipped. They flip back over, at least 1 flips back over on every activation. Overall, this is a little bit more interesting than Gadgeteer and gives the player a little bit more to decide on whether just to use a skill and the action points. They're thinking about how strong they want that skill to be, and that feeling is the best here with Magus. And the last, and probably one in which that I totally overlooked out of the gates until I understood how important movement was in this game, and actually how that was probably the best part, because, you know, I don't know if I'd mentioned this, when you destroy crystals, you just stand next to them and destroy them. There is a little bit of thought around the color crystal. If they're blue, you're going to take on that blight. We had discussed before, blight's bad. That will kill you pretty quickly, so you have to make sure you have enough damage, or at least try to have enough damage to take those out in one shot. But it's pretty anticlimactic. The climbing is the most strategic part, and free climber supercharges you. It's pretty simple, not complex whatsoever, but does give you flexibility around the map. That, along with Kestrel and its cheap super jump, make this probably the best combination in my mind, although it is very specific, but allows you to jump around the map the most, which I found the most fun in all of this stuff. To recap the card play, the basic actions are just basic. I mean, I amount those to you having an NES controller with a directional pad and an AB button. Not incredibly interesting. The Leviathans, to be fair, depending on what you're playing, drive the interest. They drive those basic actions to be more interesting. And I definitely had more fun on the more complex maps. But where I struggle are all of these skills. Yes, it's the nature of spending and that kind of marshmallow test concept that I had mentioned earlier, albeit it's a rough comparison, but it's kind of how I felt. When I actually got down to brass tacks, I basically want to play two classes. None of the others felt particularly interesting or frankly complex enough to keep me interested in each and every play. Even if I'm playing a totally different Leviathan and there's a different puzzle to solve, I'm still knocking crystals and moving around a map. There is less depth to what I'm trying to do. And then when I have a character / class combination that's not giving me really something interesting or this feeling of power, that's when it suffered. And so we're on the same page, my gold standard for co-op card play is Spirit Island. Spirit Island, you're taking into account your energy economy, what the card is actually going to do, whether it's fast or slow. You are looking at activation of the enemy, and you're able to predict it very much like Leviathan Wild. You're also looking at your elemental symbols to see how they interact with your particular spirit, and if you play enough of them in the right combination, you can do more powerful things. And when you can pull that off, you feel really smart, you feel powerful, you feel like you are scraping by and finding a way to win this thing by your own doing, not picking from a couple cards in your hand that the decisions seem to be pretty obvious. Spirit Island is not a fair comparison. It's just my gold standard. It's significantly more complex. There's significantly more going on. It's a dynamic play state that's constantly changing, the goals of which are also constantly changing depending on that board state. So it's a different league altogether. I think probably a more relevant and fair comparison is a game I actually recently reviewed in Defense of the Wild. It's another light co-op trying to fight off something. In this case, it's machines that are building in your forest. More similar to Spirit Island, it's a cascading failure type of game. The card play skills aren't necessarily inherently more interesting. You can probably make the case that Leviathan Wilds is actually better in that aspect, but the actual card play to me seemed more rewarding because each time you are secretly choosing a card simultaneously with another person, it has action points, really similar, and it also has a skill or an effect that is either persistent or immediate. If it's persistent, a lot of times it affects the other players, and you get both of them when you play them. So you're not necessarily doing this marshmallow test math, and when you play something with a cool ability, getting dinged for it on the back end. I totally understand that many will see that as a feature. It drives friction in decision space, and it by design is totally fundamental. I just felt better in the card play with Defense of the Wild. In Defense of the Wild, it's not just the card play, it's what you're trying to accomplish. You're not just trying to accomplish one goal. When in Leviathan Wilds, you're trying to just knock off crystals. In this instance, you're trying to get rid of pollution. You're trying to build your buildings. You have to build them all to actually win the game. But to build a building, you have to gain support, and that's through the aforementioned pollution, breaching walls. You have to rewild their factories. There's just a lot more going on that you actually have to take care of. And the board state is dynamic. It's constantly changing. I make this comparison because I asked my son yesterday, what would you rather play? He very recently played Defense of the Wild. He's Defense of the Wild. He said clearly it's something that he would much prefer to play. And he didn't think Leviathan Wilds was bad by any stretch, but when I gave him that comparison, he chose that one, and I probably would as well for a co-op entry-level fun puzzle that has variety and asymmetric powers and card play and such. That's just my pick. All of that said, though, Leviathan Wilds is a fine game, and I will have a positive inflection on fine. It is good. It's a good game. For me to have said that it is great or it slaps, or it's the best game of 2024. I'd have to go to bed like thinking about it, thinking about the strategy, what I could do better, kicking myself for the decisions I made with a particular Leviathan. I just haven't felt that. And I know like I said, I know I'm in the minority, but this is the way I feel, and I am what I am. And I am what I am, what I am, and I am. If you like this content and you want me to keep posting in like the 4 to 8 range per month, I need your support. The more videos I do, frankly, the more money I spend. I spent probably too much on this game to get it to the channel. And for me to continue to do that 4 to 8 times a month is a drag. So if you're so inclined and you enjoy this, I humbly come to you asking for your support. That support does not come without any sort of compensation. You get Discord access. We have a very small family, but it has been active and really fun to get to know everybody. You get a members only video once per month. There's already one up right this second, and you get early access. Typically it's 12 to 24 hours on every single one of my videos. If you decide to support me, I really appreciate it. And with all of that said, have a great day.